If you think congressional hearings are boring, slow, and predictable, think again, because what you're about to hear isn't just another political debate. It's a showdown that turned a national spotlight onto one of the most controversial bills in America and exposed just how fragile constitutional freedoms can be when wrapped in the language of public safety. This moment didn't just happen. It unfolded like a political thriller. And trust me, once you see what went down in this hearing, you'll understand why millions of Americans couldn't stop talking about it. But before the drama erupted, the hearing room felt like a pressure cooker right on the edge of exploding. Members of Congress took their seats. Cameras were rolling. Reporters refreshed their feeds, waiting for sound bites. And at the center of the storm sat a man who believed he was fully prepared for whatever questions came his way. Texas Governor Greg Abbott. There he was at the witness table, composed, confident, in control. A governor with decades of political experience, accustomed to cameras, controversy, and criticism. His wheelchair positioned carefully at the center, he knew the optics. He had done this routine many times, and it showed in the way he leaned toward the microphone with professional ease. He wasn't nervous. Why would he be? He was here to present what he believed would be seen as his next big legislative win. The Community Protection Act, a bill he claimed would make Texas safer than ever. From his opening statement alone, he sounded unshakable. We're simply giving law enforcement the tools they need to keep our communities safe. Strong, direct, simple, the type of line designed for headlines and sound bites. The kind his political base loves. Law and order, tough on crime, protect the families, support the police. Messaging that usually gets applause before anyone even reads the fine print. And that was the key. His statement sounded perfectly reasonable. If you hadn't read the bill, but sitting several seats away, silently preparing for a turn, was someone who had read the bill. Every word, every clause, every dangerous loophole. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She sat with stillness. Not the stillness of someone passive or uninterested, but the intense, calculating stillness of a lawyer who has spotted the weak points in the opponent's argument and is simply waiting for a moment to strike. While others half listen, check their phones, or whisper to aides, Crockett was laser-focused. Her pen wasn't taking scattered notes. She was building a case. Because she hadn't just skimmed Abbott's bill, she had investigated it. The last 72 hours before this hearing, she spent them the way only a seasoned civil rights attorney would, reading every single line of the bill, cross-checking it with constitutional law, consulting civil liberties experts, researching how similar laws had crushed protests in other states. She wasn't coming to ask softball questions. She came prepared to expose the parts Abbott hoped no one would notice. The energy in the room shifted when the committee chairman finally said the words everyone was waiting for. The chair now recognizes Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas for 5 minutes of questioning. If you know Crockett's reputation, you know those 5 minutes rarely stay 5 minutes and never go the way the witness expects. This is where the story really begins. But before we step into the confrontation that would send shockwaves through the country, I want you to think about this. Why do certain politicians use public safety as a shield to pass laws that actually limit freedom? Because if people are scared, they're easier to convince. And Governor Abbott was about to learn that fear-based talking points don't stand a chance when someone has done the homework and refuses to be intimidated. In segment 2, the temperature in that hearing room is about to rise fast, and the first cracks in Abbott's confident armor will appear. Don't miss this part, because this is where Crockett sets the perfect trap, and Abbott walks directly into it. Crockett adjusted her microphone with calm precision, the kind that instantly tells a room someone is about to take control. She didn't begin with aggression. No raised voice. No hostility. Just a polite, calculated opening, the kind skilled interrogators use right before tightening the net. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor Abbott, I appreciate you taking the time to come before this committee to discuss your Community Protection Act. Before we get into details, I want to make sure I understand your central argument correctly. You're telling us this bill is necessary to keep Texans safe. Is that accurate? A simple, harmless question on the surface. Abbott smiled, relieved. Easy start. That's exactly right, Congresswoman. Public safety is my top priority, and this legislation gives law enforcement the authority they need to protect our communities. He thought he was on solid ground. Crockett nodded thoughtfully, building rapport, a deliberate move. And you've mentioned several times that this bill is about fighting crime, protecting families, and supporting police. Important goals, which I think everyone in this room agrees are important. Correct. Abbott's smile widened. He believed she was aligning with him. I'm glad we can find common ground, Representative. And that was his first mistake, because Crockett wasn't agreeing. She was getting him on record. A strategy every skilled attorney knows. Get the witness to publicly confirm a harmless premise, then use that very premise to corner them. Crockett continued, her tone shifting, still respectful, but with steel beneath the surface. Common ground is a good place to start. So let's talk about what this bill actually does. Governor, not the talking points, not the press release version, but what's written in the legislation you're asking Congress to support. She lifted a thick, tabbed document, the bill itself, full of notes, highlights, and color-coded tabs. A visual message to the audience. I read this. All of it. Abbott's smile faltered just a little. Crockett turned to her first tab. Section 7 of your Community Protection Act creates a new category of offense called organized disruption. Governor, can you explain to this committee what qualifies as organized disruption under your definition? Abbott leaned back, regaining composure. This was familiar territory. Talking points he had rehearsed. That provision is designed to address situations where groups intentionally disrupt public order, block roadways, or interfere with lawful commerce. It's common-sense public safety legislation. Crockett nodded, then delivered the first strike. Let me read the actual language of your bill, Governor, because I think the American people deserve to hear what you're actually proposing. She read slowly, so every word hit. Organized disruption shall be defined as any gathering of 3 or more persons that creates or has the potential to create interference with normal activities, traffic flow, business operations, or public services. She lowered the document and locked eyes with Abbott. The audience felt the shift immediately. They sensed the trap. Under this definition, Governor, wouldn't a group of college students protesting tuition increases on a public sidewalk qualify as organized disruption? Wouldn't parents standing outside a school board meeting to raise concerns about their children's education qualify? Wouldn't workers picketing for fair wages qualify? Abbott's jaw tightened. The smile was nearly gone. Representative, those scenarios are hypothetical and... Crockett didn't let him finish. Her voice was calm, firm, surgical. They're not hypothetical at all. They're exactly the kind of protected First Amendment activities that happen every day in Texas and across this country. And your bill turns them into criminal offenses. A wave of murmurs swept through the hearing room. Reporters began typing faster. Members of Congress flipped through their copies of the bill, suddenly alert. The atmosphere changed. No one was checking phones now. Abbott attempted to regain ground, reverting to messaging discipline. Congresswoman, I think you're misinterpreting the intent. She interrupted again, but with precision, using a lawyer's tactic. Cut off the escape route early. I'm not interpreting anything, Governor. I'm reading your words. You could almost feel Abbott mentally reaching for a comeback, and finding none. Then Crockett did something smart, something that keeps viewers locked in. She paused. She let the silence in the room just long enough for the audience to process what they just heard and to wonder what she would say next. And then she delivered the tease, the kind that makes viewers stay for the next segment. And, Governor, Section 7 is just the beginning. What I'm about to show you in Sections 9, 11, and 12 is far more alarming. That is where this segment ends. Because in Segment 3, the confrontation escalates fast, and Abbott begins to lose control. If Section 7 cracked the foundation of Abbott's bill, Section 9 blew a hole straight through it. Crockett didn't waste a second. She flipped to the next tab, her tone sharpening, not emotional, but legal, precise, undeniable. Let's move to Section 9, Governor. This section authorizes law enforcement to disperse any gathering they believe has disruptive potential before any disruption actually happens. She emphasized 2 words, believe, and potential. Because those two words alone could erase decades of civil rights. Abbott leaned in, trying to sound patient. Representative, law enforcement needs tools to prevent chaos before it starts. We can't wait for violence or disorder. Crockett cut him off, this time not for effect, but to protect a constitutional line. Governor, that's called prior restraint. The Supreme Court is extremely clear. The government cannot shut down speech or assembly because of what it thinks might happen. She held up her pocket constitution, a visual she knew cameras would zoom in on. The First Amendment doesn't protect speech the government likes. It protects speech the government fears or disagrees with. That line hit like a gavel. Abbott tried to pivot to safety again, but Crockett stayed on offense. Section 9 gives police the power to shut down peaceful gatherings, not because they're disruptive, but because an officer imagines they might become disruptive. Governor, do you understand how dangerous that standard is? Abbott exhaled, visibly irritated now. Representative, you're presenting the most extreme interpretation. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't get emotional. She did something far more effective. She used real-world evidence. We don't have to imagine how this will be used. We've seen it before. After the 2020 protests, states passed similar laws. And here's what happened. She lifted a second set of documents. Case files, reports, news clippings, receipts. In Oklahoma, a grandmother protesting education cuts was arrested because police anticipated her group might block access to the Capitol. In Florida, environmental activists planning a beach cleanup were charged with felonies because they may have caused public disruption. And in Iowa, disability rights advocates were prosecuted because their sit-in outside a senator's office had the potential to interfere with business. With every example, Abbott's face stiffened. He couldn't call them hypotheticals. They'd already happened, and Crockett wasn't done. She slid to Section 11, the digital trapdoor in the bill. Now let's talk about Section 11, Governor. This section creates criminal penalties for using social media or electronic communication to coordinate activities that may result in disruption. The room went silent because everyone understood what that meant. Crockett looked directly at the cameras, speaking not to Abbott now, but to the public. Governor, do you understand what you're criminalizing here? You're making it illegal to use Facebook, Twitter, or even group text messages to organize a protest. She leaned forward, voice firm. You're turning digital organizing, the backbone of modern democracy, into evidence of criminal conspiracy. Abbott tried to interrupt. Those provisions include. Crockett raised a hand. Controlled, deliberate. Where are the safeguards, Governor? Show me. Point to the line. Because I've read this bill front to back 3 times. I've had constitutional scholars at UT, SMU, and Baylor review it. And do you know what they all said? She paused, letting the anticipation build. They said this bill would not survive its first constitutional challenge. They said it's a direct assault on the First Amendment, and they said it's designed to silence dissent. Gasps, keyboard typing, camera shutters clicking. Abbott tried a different tactic, the one many politicians resort to when losing ground. Patronize the woman, questioning them. Representative Crockett, I understand that as someone newer to Congress, these issues. The crowd reacted instantly, a mix of groans and raised eyebrows. He had just underestimated the wrong person. Crockett didn't let him finish. And this time, she brought fire. Governor Abbott, I spent 15 years as a civil rights attorney. I've defended protesters who were arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights. I've fought unconstitutional laws like this in state and federal court. So, please, do not insult my intelligence or this committee's time by suggesting I don't understand what I'm reading. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Even Republican members shifted in their seats. Crockett had just neutralized his condescension permanently, and then she delivered the setup for the next major bombshell. Governor, what's in Section 12 of your bill goes beyond criminalizing protest. It targets the people who support those protesting. And that takes this from unconstitutional to authoritarian. That's where we pause. Because Section 12 is the most dangerous part of the bill. And in Segment 4, Crockett exposes it so brutally that the room nearly erupts. This isn't governance. It's a blueprint for control. The room was already tense when Jasmine Crockett leaned back into her microphone, eyes locked on Governor Abbott like a laser. Let's talk about Section 12. You could feel the energy shift. The committee members stopped shuffling papers. Even the cameras zoomed in, sensing something big was coming. Crockett placed a final binder on the desk, thicker than the others. She tapped it once. Because Section 12 isn't about protest. It's about power. Abbott clasped his hands, attempting a patient smile. Crockett didn't look away. Section 12 allows the state to penalize any person, organization, or business that provides support, financial, physical, or digital, to any gathering later deemed unlawful, not violent, not destructive, just unapproved by the state. She paused, letting the words sink in. Governor, this provision doesn't target protesters. It targets the people who stand with them. She held up 3 fingers. This section does 3 things, and each one belongs in an authoritarian playbook. Finger 1. First, financial warfare. Banks, payroll providers, and payment apps may freeze accounts of individuals who donate to protest groups. You are criminalizing charity. You are choking off financial lifelines for civic action. Murmurs rippled across the hearing room. Abbott quickly leaned forward. Representative, that is a gross mischaracterization. Crockett didn't even blink. Finger 2. Second, surveillance state. Section 12 authorizes the creation of a state database to track supporters, not criminals, not rioters, supporters. Anyone who sends a text, shares a link, or posts on social media encouraging attendance can be added to a government watch list. Gasps. Audible. A Republican member whispered, "Is that accurate?" Crockett answered without taking her eyes off Abbott. Page 317, line 12 to 29. I highlighted it for your convenience. Cameras flashed. Abbott's jaw tightened. Finger 3. Crockett leaned in, voice low but powerful. Third, punishing solidarity. Section 12 makes it a misdemeanor to provide material aid to participants in an unlawful assembly. That includes food, water, transportation, medical supplies. She pointed at the audience. You could go to jail for handing a bottle of water to a protester. Someone in the room gasped loud enough to echo. Crockett continued, "You are criminalizing humanity." Abbott lifted a hand, trying to cut in. Representative Crockett, you are twisting the intent. Crockett snapped her gaze to him. The intent? Governor, I am reading the text you signed. Abbott's composure finally cracked. It is meant to prevent outside agitators, radical groups, and foreign-backed organizations from funding chaos in our communities. Crockett sees the opening. Foreign-backed? That word does not appear once in this section. Not once. What does appear 6 times is the word support. And 0 times do we see limits, oversight, or judicial review. She dropped her hand on the binder with a dull thud. This isn't governance. It's a blueprint for control. Silence. Then Crockett went for the throat. Calmly. Governor, you have drafted a system where the government decides which movements live and which movements die, where the state can starve a cause of resources, scare away supporters, and track every citizen who dares stand up. Abbott's face reddened. I will not sit here and be accused of authoritarianism by someone who... Crockett cut him off with steel in her voice. Section 12 mirrors policies used in Russia, Hungary, and China to smother political dissent before it starts. And you know it. Now the room erupted. Gasps, shouts, crosstalk. The committee chair banged the gavel. Order! Order! Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She delivered the mic drop. The First Amendment is not a privilege granted by the government. It is a right that protects the people from the government. But this bill flips it on its head and hands the state the power to decide who may speak, who may gather, and who may care. Abbott tried to respond, but his voice trembled for the first time. You are misrepresenting. The bill contains safeguards. He stumbled. Cameras caught it. Headlines were being written in real time. Crockett spoke softly, the way prosecutors do right before conviction. Governor Abbott, Section 12 is not about safety. It is about fear. The government's fear of the people. Boom. The chair slammed the gavel again as members argued across party lines. Reporters stood, shouting questions. The hearing spun into chaos. Abbott looked rattled. Crockett sat back, calm, composed, mission complete. What happened inside that hearing room didn't stay there for even 5 minutes. The moment Representative Jasmine Crockett finished her takedown of Governor Abbott's bill, the political aftershocks hit like a nationwide earthquake. Before Abbott even made it back to his staff SUV outside the Capitol, the clip of Crockett's questioning had already gone viral. Journalists who had attended the hearing rushed to the hallways, typing frantically, calling their editors, and posting live reactions. But the moment that lit the match was a single 47-second clip uploaded by a freelance reporter sitting in the second row. The caption read, "Jasmine Crockett just turned a congressional hearing into a constitutional masterclass." Abbott never stood a chance. Within 10 minutes, it had 1.2 million views. Within an hour, hashtag Crockett Destroys Abbott was the #1 trend in the United States. By lunchtime, it was trending in 14 countries. And here's the part that kept people watching. Every few minutes, someone would post a new clip, a new angle, a new moment Crockett delivered a surgical strike that left Abbott speechless. Viewers weren't just watching the hearing. They were studying it like a courtroom thriller. Commentators on TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube, and Twitter, now X, began stitching the clip with reactions like, "This is how you hold power accountable." She didn't ask questions, she delivered verdicts. When she said authoritarianism, I screamed. People weren't scrolling past this one. They were watching it to the end, then re-watching it. And if you think the internet reaction was intense, wait until you see how the political system reacted. Cable news went nuclear. CNN broke into scheduled programming. MSNBC cleared an entire block on prime time to replay the hearing. Even Fox News, which initially tried to spin the moment as Democrat grandstanding, couldn't ignore the disaster unfolding for Abbott. Within hours, legal experts across the political spectrum were calling in. A conservative constitutional scholar on Fox said, reluctantly, "I'll be honest, I did not expect Representative Crockett to be this prepared. Section 7 alone raises constitutional red flags, but Section 12, if her reading is accurate, this bill is legally indefensible." On MSNBC, a former federal judge didn't hold back. This wasn't a hearing. It was a public execution of an unconstitutional bill. Abbott's office went into emergency mode. Inside the Texas governor's communication office, phones were blowing up. Staffers scrambled to write a press release to counter the narrative. But the internet had already set the story in stone. Abbott's allies in Texas state legislature began texting each other in panic. "She made us look like we're passing a dictatorship bill. Was that stuff really in Section 12? If this gets worse, we pull support." One lawmaker who had publicly supported the bill deleted 3 tweets praising it. Another announced he would be reviewing the legislation with constitutional experts. Translation: they were running for cover. A leaked text thread from Abbott's advisors, which Politico published just 1 day later, included a message from his legal counsel. "We should have anticipated the First Amendment trap. She was ready for every inch of this." Abbott's team wasn't worried about Democrats. They were terrified of their own base turning on them if this became seen as an anti-freedom, anti-rights bill. And it was too late because the narrative was locked. Public reaction reached the streets. By evening, protests had broken out. Yes, protests inspired by a hearing about a bill designed to restrict protests. College campuses lit up first. Students held signs saying, "If this bill passed, this protest would be illegal." You don't protect communities by silencing them. Silencing dissent is un-American. Civil rights groups capitalized quickly. The ACLU, NAACP, and 18 grassroots organizations launched a joint petition titled, "Defend the First Amendment, Stop the Community Protection Act." Within 24 hours, 1.3 million signatures. But the most powerful response didn't come from activists or politicians. It came from ordinary Americans, teachers, nurses, veterans, parents, who recorded heartfelt videos sharing how they would have been criminalized under Abbott's bill. A teacher in Houston said, When we marched for better school funding, we weren't criminals. We were parents fighting for our kids. Abbott wanted to make that illegal. A veteran posted, "I didn't serve overseas, come home, and see a governor try to ban the freedoms I fought for." These messages hit harder than any debate. They weren't political. They were personal. And just when everyone thought the story couldn't escalate further, something happened that turned this from a political scandal into a national movement. A grandmother, the same one who thanked Crockett at the town hall, went viral telling her story about being arrested for a peaceful protest protecting her grandkids' school. Her 60-second clip got 23 million views in a single night. America didn't just watch Crockett's cross-examination. America felt it, because this wasn't about Abbott anymore. It was about their rights.